Okay, hi. So I finished this dress. I'll show you some pictures later. But I kind of think some of you might be scared to sew with the sequins. This is from So English. It's a really heavy mesh, and the sequins is just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous fabric. It's an ombre, so it comes down to it's like dark to light. I have a couple dresses made out of this, or not this color, but the same fabric in different colorways. And what I do is I take the selvage edge, which is just the mesh with no sequins, and I'll make a little facing. So you can see, let me see, there we go. On the inside, right here, is an inch, and I do that all the way around. If I was doing a lining, I would line it with that. The bottom hem is done the same way. I just make a facing. This is 2 inches wide, and then I just stitch it down, flip it under, stitch it, so it doesn't rub or anything. Now the inside seams are just as is. I haven't done anything to them. They don't really bother me. You can work them out and lay them flat, and if you work it long enough and flatten it out enough, the sequins will pop out. But picking all this out, I don't have time for that, and I don't want to do it. So you can cover it the same way I've covered the bottom hem with another fabric, or even the selvage edge mesh. If you're sensitive to it, you can use that to cover your inside seams. The Bonnie dress I made, this is the dolman. The Bonnie dress I made in the silver and white sequins. That one is lined, the bodice is lined up to the underbust. So nothing up here bothers me on that one. I did end up having, I wore it for like 12 hours. We were running around doing pictures everywhere. I ended up having some pretty deep scratches on my legs from the inside seam, which I went back and put a strip of fabric on the inside of that. So if I'm going to wear that again, it's not going to do that to me. It won't scratch me or hurt me in any way. It's safe. The other dresses I made the cherry bomb. I did both ways. I did with a circle skirt, and I did the pencil dress too. Both of them are lined. The bodice is completely lined on that dress, and the circle skirt didn't bother me because it sticks out. And the pencil skirt, I just lined the inside of the bottom seam like I did with my Bonnie, so that one's fine too. So if you're worried about the sequins, it's pretty easy, and it doesn't take much effort at all to make these little facings. And as far as sewing, I'll show you in a minute. It's really easy to sew through. I just use a 90-14 needle, basic needle, nothing fancy, and it's not even a knit needle. It's not stretch fabric. It's nothing. It's just strong enough and thick enough to go through the sequins, so you don't have to pick it out. And I don't know, it seems to work. So you have mesh, and then you have the sequin. This is the selvage edge. Most people are just going to throw this away, but I use it for the lining if it's wide enough for parts of it, or the facing like I was talking about earlier, which you can see here on the dress. There's the facing is right here, and this is the wrong side of the fabric. So if you get this fabric, it's really pretty, and you can see it's heavy mesh, but it's not so heavy that it's uncomfortable to wear or anything. So there's the stretch for that, and this is the stretch on the sequin. This way there's a little give, the other way there's more. It's not super stretchy, but it does work for the patterns I've been designing lately. That is that. So I have the mesh on one side, sequin on the other, and we're gonna sew that. So in order to sew that, I like to put the sequin side down, or the wrong side of the sequin down. The mesh is on top, so we're going to be sewing through the sequin this way through the mesh. back stitch, just like normal. You don't want to stretch the fabric at all because that will cause your needle to break. I do sew over my pins. Back stitch at the end. As you can see, I'm going right through the sequin. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. The reason I put the mesh here is because this part is going to be touching my back when I sew it onto the dress. And that part would get irritating. So I'm sewing that closed on the sides. Okay, so this is done. I'm going to turn it right side out and just top stitch it down on the sides so that it stays nice when it's laying on my back, not going to be shifting too much and turning and doing weird things. So this again is a band to go across the back of the dress. I'm just going to push out seam allowance so it's nice and even. And then we're going to sew right through the top, right through all that pretty sequin. And this is just top stitching the seam allowance on the inside and the outside down, so it stays nice and flat. Just repeat the other side. With this fabric too, I like to pull just a little bit on the top layer. They're both the same size, but I'm just going to pull it over and slide the mesh lining under slightly so that you don't see any of it when it's being worn. Okay, so the band is done. Now we're just going to attach this to the back of the dress. This is my band, and I'm attaching it to the back of my dress. The pattern piece has marks for the top, where your top band should go, or your ties. It also has a lower mark for if you're making the X shape. This is a single band, so we're just attaching it. This is where my mark was on the pattern piece. We're going to attach that. The top of the band is going to sit at the very top of that mark. Okay, so we're going to attach that there, pin it in place, and we're just going to make sure the inside is past the seam allowance. You want it at least a 1/4 inch past. It's something to stitch onto, and you want enough there so when the fabric stretches, if it stretches, it doesn't fold out and do something weird here. So that's pinned. I'm going to put another pin in there just to keep it in place, and then we'll sew that on. We're going to go right through all layers. We're going to go through this top layer of sequin and this layer. And I'm stitching right on top of the top stitch from, if you did a binding, this one has a facing because of the sequin. I did a facing so it was nice and smooth. If you did the binding, you're going to go right on top of your binding stitches. If you did the band, you're going to go right underneath them, or in the ditch. And in the ditch means in the seam that is caused by the two fabrics meeting. That's in the ditch. It's a hidden stitch. So just stitch, 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 back it up, Go straight. That's it. And my machine settings are super simple. This is just a straight centered needle. My stitch length is at the longest stitch length that my machine offers, which is 4. And my tension is just under halfway, so it's at 4. I use between 3.5 and 4 usually, depending on the fabric I'm doing. If I'm making knit things or stretchy things, I like to keep my tension at 4. My stitch length is generally always on the longest length, unless I'm making buttonholes or something like that. Then I might make it smaller. So that's that, sewn all the way through. We're going to go ahead and stitch across one more. I have 2 rows of top stitching here to hold that facing in place. So we're going to go ahead and top stitch across that second row, and I'm going to finish this side over here, and then we will see what it looks like on.
Whoa.